and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today what we're talking about are two things. Number one is how we can break the ice with our database and with anybody for that matter. And then second, how we can continue a conversation. Right now is a very logical time for all of us to be reaching out to our database. As we're approaching holiday season or in the holiday season or into the new year, it's such an easy time for us to ask, how was their year? What are they up to for the holiday season? What are they up to for New Year's? And oftentimes it's a missed opportunity if we're not doing this in this month or into January. The other interesting component about us reaching out at this point in time is as we start to move into the new year, oftentimes people are starting to think about their moving plans. So being in touch with people right around the new year, into the new year, or in the holiday season is just such an effective time, because they're thinking about what does this next year hold for me? And is there any moving plans? Also, they're going to be seeing a lot of people. So if they're at events, if they're at parties, they're going to be seeing people. So we need to be top of mind with people as they're going through their holiday season and going into their new year, because they're seeing a lot of people. So it's a missed opportunity if we don't reach out. But there's a problem. There's a problem that most of us have, or it's a blocker, I should say. And that blocker tends to be, how do we actually kick off the conversation? And then once we're into the conversation, how do we keep it going? So that's what we're going to dive into today. So first off, how do we kick off the conversation? How do we break the ice? Well, there's really two very easy, straightforward approaches that we can use, especially if we don't know what to say. So it's one thing if we're reaching out with a purpose of some sorts, but sometimes we just don't necessarily have a purpose, but we do know we need to talk to that person. So how do we go about doing this? So first off, we can use the best SOI icebreaker of all time. And it goes like this. I was just thinking about you. So simple, so straightforward. You just thinking about them makes them feel good. And on top of that, it's such a nice way to work your way into the conversation. As far as how this can actually work, yes, your CRM may be reminding you to follow up with John, but then oftentimes I'm taking a moment to think through, how's John doing? When did I help John last? When did I see John last? So you're starting to think through your relationship with this individual, and then you jump into the conversation. Now, the reason why I do this think through concept is because when I'm having the conversation with them, I do want it to be genuine. I don't want this to be just like on triple dialers and I'm just call. As soon as somebody answers, I'm asking that question or I'm saying, I was just thinking about you. That to me is inauthentic and it actually just doesn't tend to work well. So instead, really what I'm after is genuinely thinking about that person and then genuinely thinking about my relationship with them and then having a conversation with them. And I really care about what it is that's new in their life. So that's the key with that very easy, straightforward icebreaker. The second icebreaker, it's equally as strong in many respects. And basically what you're doing with it is you're reaching out to somebody and asking for help. This can work very, very well. So what does this individual know that you'd like help with? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to jump in and help you in some extreme way. Usually what I'm doing during this conversation is I'm bringing up such things as, how is it living in X community? I have a couple of buyers looking near your community right now. Would love to know your top 3 favorite things and your 3 things that you would say to watch out for with this community. That's just a simple example. Maybe with a home, maybe with a developer who built their home. Maybe it's with a different style of home. It can be something that's going on with their work, with their life, anything. So we're just asking for a very simple piece of advice. And this can be really nice. Those folks who live in the community, oftentimes once they live in there, they can start to know that community a lot better than us. Well, it depends on how much, I guess, we transact or how much we're in that community. But generally, somebody who lives in that community is going to know the community more so than agents who actually sell in that community. This can actually be used as great information when you're educating people on moving into the community. So if you ever have a buyer who's looking at a certain community and you have somebody who lives in that community who you helped, or even if you haven't helped them, they're just part of your database and you know they live in this community, that's such a great opportunity to ask them what their thoughts are. Not only does it actually lead to that conversation, it actually leads to a really nice conversation. On top of that, you're also getting information that you can then supply to a buyer. So that's why I love this script where we're just reaching out, asking for help. And really, we're not asking for anything big. We're not asking for a referral or anything like that. All we're doing is asking them for a small piece of advice. These two things can be such a great way to kick off a conversation. And then typically what happens is after about 10 seconds of conversation, it starts to flow. Usually we're limited by the icebreaker. Once the icebreaker is done and we're actually talking with them and we're asking them what's new with them, the conversation tends to flow. It's typically if we can get over that first 5 to 10 seconds, then we're in a good spot. But that 5 to 10 seconds is what stops so many of us from actually just reaching out. And these two techniques work perfectly for that. So we're just saying, just thinking of you, or we're saying we're reaching out looking for some bit of help. Great way to kick off the conversation, and then it flows. So once the conversation is going, what should we actually do to keep it going? And can we actually start to tailor this towards real estate? Now, if it's somebody in the database, I would not bring up real estate unless they're bringing it up with us. However, if it's somebody who's not in my database, or if it's somebody who is relatively new to my database, or maybe I'm a relatively new agent, so not everyone in my database even knows or remembers. Actually, remembers is more of an appropriate word to use here, because oftentimes we think everyone in our database knows that we're in real estate, when in fact, they need to hear it 7 or 8 times that we're in real estate before that's actually committed to memory. And even then, it could drop off. So if we're relatively new in the industry, we do need to be tailoring the conversation towards real estate. We definitely do. If we're more experienced, we probably don't want to tailor it towards real estate unless they ask. But what happens if we do want to start to move this conversation towards real estate? How can we do so in a comfortable way? Well, the approach that you can use here is very, very simple. All you need to ask them is, have they been following the real estate market? Now, most of the time, they're going to be the one that kicks off that conversation. They're going to say, how's work? What's new in the real estate market? And then we can jump into real estate. But if it's not going in that direction, we want to tailor the conversation towards that, we can simply ask them, well, have you been watching the real estate market? And then that kicks off the conversation into real estate. Typically around the holiday season, New Year's, things like that, I'm really not talking much at all about the real estate market. All I'm looking to do is connect. So if they were to bring up real estate, definitely I would jump into it. But generally, I'm actually not tailoring the conversation towards real estate. It's only if they bring it up. But again, if you're relatively new, you can always bring up that line of, have you been following the real estate market? It's such a great way to transition the conversation. So what if we do not want to bring up real estate? Our whole approach here is to connect with them, right? So let's find out more about what's new with them. What can we do? Well, what you can use is the HEFE technique, which is HEFE. So H is for hobbies, E is for entertainment, F is for food, and then E is for environment. So another approach you could use is the Ford technique, which is family, occupation, recreation, dreams. Both work quite nicely, but I prefer HEFE because you are starting to touch on topics, usually with Ford, that maybe are a little bit more sensitive at times. So sometimes if we're talking about family or we're getting into dreams and things like that, especially actually around the holiday season into the new year, I tend to try to avoid those conversations unless I'm very, very comfortable with that. So instead, a little bit of a lower pressure approach is using the whole concept of HEFE. So I want to bring up hobbies. So what are hobbies that they're doing? What are hobbies that you're doing that you want to share? Entertainment. What are they watching for shows? What are they watching for TV? What are they doing for fun out in the community? Food. What are they cooking? What are they planning on cooking? What's going on in their life? What restaurants have they visited? And then environment. Environment is what's going on around them, their community, their house. I will tend to tailor the conversation towards these things. And I'll usually look at HEFE before actually having the conversation with somebody and saying, okay, of these 4 things, so hobbies, entertainment, food, and environment, is there a certain direction where I want to take that conversation? Or is there a certain topic I want to bring up? Let's say it's a certain hobby that I know they have. Well, I'll bring that up. So I'm not necessarily bringing up all 4 of those. I'm just using that as a means to actually jog my memory and to say, okay, this is what I'd love to ask them about. And then from there, we can also, of course, use this concept of Ford, which is family, asking about family, occupation, which is work, recreation, which is hobbies and things that they like doing, and dreams, which tends to be their plans, their future plans. But I find that HEFE is a little bit better received and is a little bit more enjoyable topics for us to get into. Now, naturally, with HEFE, you're going to have some questions on what they're doing, what they've been up to, what's new with their hobbies, what are they doing for food. And what we need to think about here is not ever asking a question just in isolation. So think of questions as plurals in order to keep conversations going, especially with people within our database. Actually, people in general, we can think of questions in plurals. So what do we mean by this? What do we mean by think of questions in plurals? It means we don't just want to hit them with one question. What have you been doing instead of golf now that it's wintertime? That is fine. There's nothing wrong with that question. But then from there, we need to ask a follow-up question. So always think of questions as plural. And we call this the second dart. So you're throwing one dart, which is a question, and then you're throwing the second dart. The second dart is the follow-up question. So what's your favorite thing about that? Why is that important to you? What else have you tried? So we're basically taking the conversation, we're thinking of any question that we ask as a plural. What's the follow-up question to that once they've actually responded? So this is the second dart technique. We're always throwing that question and then throwing a follow-up question. And this is a really great way to get a lot of engagement. And oftentimes the person who's on the receiving end, so who actually receives that second question, they feel a lot more drawn to you. Now, why is that? That's because you are diving in deeper into their interests. So you ask them a Hefe related question, and then you follow that up with, what's your favorite part about that? You're showing a level of interest. And in fact, the other really nice thing about this is sometimes when I'm talking to somebody and they're maybe telling me about a given hobby, and I ask them what's their favorite thing about it, I learn more about it and I get excited about it, something that I want to try. So it's just a great conversational technique, not only because they're going to feel great, but also because I'm going to extract more information. And in fact, you can use the second dart technique anytime. So it actually works really well too when you're listing presentations, buyer presentations, showing homes. So you ask somebody, do they like the home? And then you can follow that up with, what's your favorite part? What's your least favorite part? So that's another example of using the second dart. So when we're thinking of questions, let's always think of them in plurals, not in just singular one question. Thank you very much for watching or listening to this episode. Remember, you can reach out anytime at revrealestateschool.com, or I'm on Instagram at the.michael.montgomery. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next lesson.